Hi, my name is Lisa and I am a watercolor artist, and for today's tutorial I'm going to be walking you through how to paint some fall leaves using watercolors. For a full list of everything you need to get started, be sure to check out the video description below. So first things first, we're going to use a pencil to loosely sketch out where we want our leaves to end up. I have a few from my yard that I'm going to use to copy off of, and it doesn't have to be exactly the same layout as you do. You can sort of fiddle with the distances, but this is approximately how I want it to look. So I'm going to have a longer one at the front of the pack. So we're going to have just loosely laying out the shapes. I don't get too detailed with the angles using the pencil just because it's not necessary. We're going to be covering over it. And I may shorten a few of the stems. So the front one is the long one. Then I'm going to do a round guy right here. You just kind of draw a circle basically with a little curved tip on the front. Then I'm going to do a maple leaf shape here, and we'll get the jagged lines when we come in with color. But for drawing it out, you don't have to draw all that out. You can just kind of draw a tapered line. And this is loose watercolor, so it's not going to have every single detail being accurate. And then I'll draw one more bigger one down here. And this one's missing a stem, but I'm just going to draw it on. So there you have it. That's about all you want to have for your layout. Just a few different sizes of leaves, and then we can start adding the color. So I'd like to use an ice cube tray for my colors. I just find it helps get a lot of separation between the different colors. And I always start out with the wet technique. I always start out with clear water first. So first things first, we're gonna do this red leaf that's right here. And I'm gonna use some fairly bright colors instead of the muted tones that you typically see in fall. But I will use the fall versions. So we're gonna use some reds, some yellows, some pinks, and even some greens for these leaves. So starting on the left-hand side, because I'm right-handed, I'm gonna fill in the whole leaf with clear water. And then I'm gonna drop in some yellow. And the yellow should start to bleed around. And we're just getting a base color down for now, so it's not important that it's completely filled in. We just want quite a bit of variation. So once we get some yellow down, I'm actually going to come in and add some red. And we don't need, same as the yellow, we don't need the red to fill it in. I'm using the tip of my brush, and if you have a round brush, this works as well. Just using the tip of your brush to create those little jagged edges. This one kind of reminds me a bit of fire. As we continue to layer it though, that illusion will disappear a little bit. It'll be mostly red. So that's about what we would want for a first layer. And it looks a little bit rich in certain areas, but as it dries, those will spread a little bit. So next up, I want to do my little leaf over here. I'm gonna start, same as the other one, I'm actually gonna start with the yellow again. But this time I'm going to use, instead of my bright yellow, I'm going to use the yellow ochre. So it's a bit of a more muted yellow. And it does tend to bleed a little bit more than the brighter yellow. You'll notice that the different colors you work with bleed differently. So I'm just kind of filling in the center for this one. And then what I'm gonna do is take my bright green, and I'm actually gonna go along the edge. And I'm not being too careful about having it be perfect, just like the leaf itself. It's just about having a jagged edge on it. I mean, leaves, when they fall, they get stepped on. None of them are gonna be perfect. So that's about what you want for a first coat on that one. So you'll kind of get a sense of what I'm doing. I'm gonna keep repeating myself as I make my way around, but the idea always sort of follows the same pattern, that for the first coat, I'm just doing clear water first. All right, and then we put some yellow in. And I'm gonna do a mix of bright and yellow ochre on this one. Change it up a little bit. And this one has a little bit of a jagged outside to it, so we'll do that. And I do work fairly fast, but if you need to pause it and catch up, that's totally fine. And like I said with the other one, it doesn't have to be perfect, just showing that the edges aren't perfectly smooth is what you're trying to achieve. So then I'm going to take a little bit of that bright yellow again, and I'm just going to drop it in certain areas. This is just showing where the green used to be on the leaf before it turned yellow. So just small little areas like that. And then last but not least, this guy over here is a lot darker. So this one, we're actually going to start with the bright green. This one is a fairly smooth leaf. I love the way this bright green really bleeds nicely. And I'm going to take some dark green, the Viridian green, and make my way through the stem. And then I'm going to take some burnt sienna and make my way down the middle again. All right, so I think this is a good time to do a little bit of bleeds on some of the leaves. So some of these are still wet. So what I mean by that is I'm going to take clear water and just loosely bringing the brush up, I'm going to grab some of the pigment. And I like to do this when the paint is starting to dry but not completely dry. I just kind of make my way around, letting the brush grab at certain points. And because we're going to be going over all of these leaves a second time, they're going to get dark again. So I think I might have let this one dry too much, but that's okay. We can always do it on the second go as well. Sometimes if you massage it a little bit, it'll loosen up a bit of the pigment, but the ideal is if it's still a little bit wet. So now is a good time to add just a few splatters on this layer, just with a little green. I'm wanting my splatters to kind of follow a pattern. These leaves are kind of going around, so I'm using the brush in a motion that sort of follows the direction of the wind blowing them. So I'm gonna use a little red. I want them to look like they're blowing around. A little orange here. And I recommend, if you're not used to using splatters, that you practice a little bit on a sheet of paper first, because it can take a little bit to get the hang of it. I'm just going to add a few on some of the areas that are still wet. Oops, that one's not still wet. That can happen. No big deal. If I add splatters where I don't want them, I simply dot them up. They can always be covered over too. So that's about what I'm wanting to see, sort of a directional flow, and then we're going to go back, let this dry completely, and add another layer on top to add a bit more detail. But right now we're just trying to get the first layer down before continuing on. It's hard for me to stop sometimes with the splatters. They're so fun. All right, so let's let this dry, and then when I come back, we will do the second layer. Okay, so now that the first layer's had time to dry, we can go ahead and start working on the second layer. So same as the first, we're gonna go cover everything up again. And for the second layer, you don't wanna re-wet the first layer, so you're wanting to keep your brush strokes nice and loose and light. You will, of course, re-wet a little bit of it, but it's okay to try not to. So we're just going over it. We're not going to worry about detail just yet. That'll be on the final layer. So we're following the same pattern as before. I'm doing the outside, and I'm working fairly fast so that it doesn't dry. I think I'm going to add a little bit of orange in on this layer. I love the variation it's creating. So you can still see the other layer in between. And then for this layer, I'm actually going to bring that stem down. And we're going to do the second layer here. So same thing. My paper and paint was incredibly dry because I blow dried it. So we don't have to worry about previous paint re-wetting, or sorry, not re-wetting, but previous paint lightening or changing. Because what you want is to have some of that previous pattern show through. So it has to be nice and dry for that to happen. I used a little bit of brown here. Sorry, I didn't mention it, but I move around so fast sometimes. I forget to talk about what I'm doing. So for this layer, we're doing the same thing. I'm dropping in a bit of yellow. And then I'm gonna take this red, it's like a red iron, I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's a reddish brown. And it really helps me show some of that variation that you see in leaves. So I'm loving the way that one's looking. And this stem we're gonna do it in brown. And now, just on the second coat, you'll notice I'm starting to do like a stem line here. I just like to start to insinuate that there's gonna be some veining in these leaves. We will be going and adding more. And then over here where it's really saturated, I'd love to take this opportunity, and you can do this anytime you're working on a painting. If you notice it's a little too saturated, you can come in with these blobs that I talked about earlier, where you do clear water farther away, and then that's when you make your way up. And this is a technique I use a lot with loose watercolors. So this is something that once you kind of get the knack for it, you can use it in other paintings. So I'm gonna kind of blend these together. And then if you find it bleeds too much, have a paper towel handy and just lighten up a few of the areas. So that's all I'm doing there. So I'm really happy with these two. I'm gonna move on to the sky here. Same thing. We're filling it in. I find this leaf to be quite beautiful in my reference leaf right here. It has such unique coloring, so I hope I can capture that. I'm gonna do a tiny bit of the Viridian green now and just kind of make my way over that bright green. And hopefully some of it, as it's drying, of the brighter green will still stay through. So that's why I'm being careful not to use too heavy of a hand everywhere so that you can still see some of the lighter. Now here, because it wasn't wet still, it's not spreading the way I'd like. So I just re-wet it with a fairly dry brush. And then I'm gonna use this bright green to pull down into the stem. That's where the stem's gonna be. I'm just gonna take a bit of red. I'm noticing this is fairly dry already, so I'm actually just gonna pull down that center piece. I do skip around a lot. Forgive me if it can be hard to follow. It's just with watercolor, I do find it's easier if you do kind of skip around a little bit as it's drying. So these three I'm really happy with. We're gonna move back to this one now. So this one I'm finding it's doing a little bit of a weird thing here with the brown. So I'm gonna try and darken it a little bit. I'm gonna use more of that burnt sienna right in the center. burnt sienna can act a little funny sometimes. I find each pigment has its own tendencies, and I'm not a huge burnt sienna fan, but every once in a while it has its place, so. And there's definitely brown leaves at fall time, so we gotta capture a little bit of that. Use a bit of the Viridian green. And I think this one really needs a burnt sienna stem on it. I feel like it suits it. I'm gonna pull a little bit of this green out by doing one of those blobs that I had talked about earlier. So pulling a little out here and then a little here. You can, if it goes too crazy, like I said, you can lift it with paper towel, or I sometimes use a dry brush to sort of control how crazy those little loose edges get. So I'm gonna come in again with the center, just to keep the center nice and dark. And we'll come in after with a bit of white gouache to reinforce the veining. So I am going to do a few more splatters over top. So we'll do some yellow on this one. I'm gonna do a little bit of green on this one here. Have fun with it. See how much you like to do. If you do too many, keep your paper towel handy. It's just about having fun with it. I'm gonna throw a few pink ones in there. Come back around again. And then last but not least, this guy right here. It's getting a little bit muddied looking, so hopefully as it dries we can add a bit more detail there. So one thing that can be kind of fun to try is if you have something sharp around, like a pen or the end of a paintbrush, you can actually press down on the paper and create a bit of line, so you can see a line right there. As it's drying, it creates some texture in the paint. It's just something kind of fun you can do with watercolor. Doesn't always have the most predictable results for me, but you can see it did create a little bit of texture there, so we can do that on some of these as it's drying. It has a tendency to pull color from one spot to another, create light spots, which is what you'd see in a leaf, so that's kind of fun. This one's too dry, so I think we won't be able to get that effect, but So that's about what you want for that layer. So we're gonna let this dry 100% now, and then we're gonna go back in and add some fun little details to finish it up. All right, so now that we are done, the second layer, we're gonna go in and add some veining. So you'll wanna have a fairly fine brush for this part. And what we're gonna do is we'll start with this leaf right here. And we're gonna add some of those fine details. So along the center, you need it to be 100% dry for this part. This is where I kind of look at my reference leaves that I have here, so I can see how the veining sort of follows. And keep it really light. Let your brush bounce off the page. But this is where I do find that the leaf kind of comes together. Before this, they do kind of look like blobs. And I'm going to darken in certain areas with the red. And then I'm going to take a bit of that brown, that reddish brown that I was referencing earlier. Drop that in a few areas, maybe a little bright yellow. So it's just about going back in and adding a bit of variation, a bit of detail. And then I'm going to take a bit of the brown, the burnt sienna brown, and contour stem, and just define a few more areas. I don't want anything to look too similar, so having some variation is nice. So I'm happy with that. I'm gonna go back in after and add a little bit of white just for fun, but I like that. So now we're gonna do this guy here, and we're gonna do some brown for this veining. And I don't go too crazy. We don't need a lot of it. It's nice if some of your color ends up falling in a pattern that suits the veining. So like right here, I can kind of follow that. What I mean by that is sometimes the paint will dry in such a way that it creates natural breaks in color. And it's nice to use those. Using different levels of pressure on the brush, I can achieve different thicknesses in some of that veining and variation that I'm adding. That's about all you want for that one. I'll redefine the stem. Then I'm gonna make my way over to this one, and I'm actually gonna add brown for some of this veining here with a mix of green. So this one does not have a lot of veining on it, just some down the center. But I do notice that it has a bit of a contour in certain parts of it, where it almost outlines parts of the leaf. That's kind of neat. It's almost like the outside of the leaf is a bit singed. Then I'm going to do this guy right here. So for this one, I'm going to use a little bit of Payne's Gray. If you have a black, that can work too. We're just going to come in and darken that. Payne's Gray, what I like about it is it's not actually black. So you can mix it in with a bit of the brown. I'm just adding more and more veining by mixing the burnt sienna with the Payne's Gray. I'm gonna do a little more on this one, I think. Sometimes reinforcing some of them doesn't hurt. So now we're gonna let that dry, and then what I'm gonna do is come in and add a little bit of detail. All right, so sometimes doing a piece like this, I like to have a little white pen handy. If you have white paint, that works as well. And all I'm going to do is, with the white pen, is just add a little bit of highlights on some of this veining. And so this leaf, I'm noticing that the center stem has some highlights on it. And so I'm just helping pull those in. And like I said, you don't have to have a white pen. I find these things do wear out fairly quickly, so white paint is ideal. But my white paint happens to be dried out at the moment, so I need to get more. So we're just making our way around. And this is just kind of a fun thing to do. You don't have to do this. Your painting can look complete without it. I just love the way these little highlights look. And we'll do this one. This one I'm not doing quite as much. All right, so I think that looks complete. So I'm just gonna sign it, and that is all for this piece. So have fun with it, practice, try a few different leaves, do different compilations of leaves. Have fun getting out in nature and looking for ones that you want to capture in watercolor. With watercolor, sometimes it's not always forgiving. You can make mistakes, want to change things. And the nice part is it is a fairly quick medium. So you can always go back and change it on a new piece. So thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed painting along with me, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. And if you want to see other videos just like this one, be sure to hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.